Hello and welcome to the F12 webcast on All I Want for Christmas is Cyber Insurance, but the Grinch stole my coverage. So this is some surprise to me, has proven to be our most popular webcast of the year. Thank you to all who are joining us live. I'm joined by two experts in the field who are going to help us unpack the riddle of cyber insurance, why it seems to be changing so much and why it's such a challenge, and provide some action items about what we can do as individual organizations to make an impact, how F12 can help, how IT hygiene plays into this. And you'll leave this webcast better informed about what the landscape is out there and how you can protect your business. So without further ado, a couple of housekeeping items. We have our Q&A. If you're joining us live, fire away some questions you have during the discussion. We're happy to incorporate them. We've got precious time from these two experts, which I'll introduce very shortly. We want to make full use of it and make sure you leave informed with action items that you can take back for your benefit. All right, well, it's my pleasure to introduce two experts in the cyber insurance field. First of all, Aliya Daya, welcome to our webcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with cyber insurance.
So Aliya Daya, Rogers Insurance, formerly Rogers Insurance, now Acera Insurance. I'm a senior new business specialist and account executive, and I play in the tech space. So broadly, that means I work with clients in agri-tech, biotech, fintech, all kinds of technology. And one of those aspects is cyber insurance. So I have clients from a broad spectrum, and I have about 20 years of experience and about, I would say, 10 years of experience in the cyber insurance space.
Excellent. We'll probe into what those 10 years have been all about. It seems to me from the outside it's been a rapidly changing field. Sean Graham, welcome to our webcast. Tell us a little about you and your experience in this field.
Thanks, Devon. Again, my name is Sean Graham. I am one of the partners, and I lead the specialties group that includes cyber with CapriCMW, now Acera. And in that category, I've spent the last 9 years vivaciously learning about cyber. When I came into the insurance industry, I was challenged to learn one coverage better than anybody else, they said. And I thought, and they whispered at me, learn cyber, because it's going to change the landscape. It's going to change the landscape. And they've been right. And so when it comes to cyber, I have spent the last 9 years studying almost every day the evolving nature of the risk and the coverages, how they've changed and how it's flowing, and how watching the hard markets happen. And I love the title of this event. The Grinch stole my cyber. Well, the Grinch doesn't like people who have naughty hygiene, and so he's stealing their cyber cyber coverage.
And this is what we've heard. Is that it's just getting more and more difficult. I have a bunch of questions. I want to unpack this, but Aliya, let's start with you. I'm going to start really broad. What is going on? Why is it so difficult for businesses to get cyber insurance? It seems suddenly this year as opposed to past years.
I would say it relates back to COVID. When everybody pivoted to working from home and going remote, there were a lot of gaps that were found out within organizations' cyber hygiene. Unfortunately, too, the human is the weakest link. So when you have somebody who's removed and working remotely, they're not within the ecosystem or the environment of the office where there's a bit more control related to data. So starting March 2020, because of that pivot, a lot of criminal activity out there just amplified because there were a lot of gaps, and that just exploded. So that's what started the whole thing. So if you go back to that period, that's where you'll see the uptick in cyber related hygiene requirements, in basically limitations as to who could get insured, limits provided, increase in premiums. All of that started to balloon at that point.
All right, same question to you, Sean. From your perspective, what's going on here that's changing the game?
Yeah, well, we've just come through what's considered one of the hardest markets we've seen by hardest markets, we're referring to the insurance markets. And the insurance markets had massive losses that were not being covered by the premiums being collected. They were losing money on a very large scale. And that was amplified probably by 10 in the cyber market. The cyber markets were experiencing, 500% increases 3 years ago. Well, last year it was about 1,200% increases in losses. In this
1,200%.
1,200% on a global scale.
Yeah.
And so in Canada, we've been experiencing some real tightening of the market in requirements and real increases in prices. And Canada's on the naughty list from a global perspective. We're in the top 3 of the naughty when it comes to our cyber hygiene and security, and which is why it's becoming more difficult for Canadian companies to buy cyber insurance. So I spend a lot of my time talking with clients about how do we improve your security? What's going on with your RDP, your MFA? Going down the list. And then, Aliya's going to talk to it, but educating your employees.
I tell you, hey, first of all, kudos for following our theme with the naughty list. I just want to make sure I shout out points on that, Sean. That's brilliant. Before we unpack this, I don't want to assume our audience understands the relationships between agents and brokers and underwriters and insurers. And Aliya, could you give us a little bit of a picture of insurance? Sometimes we just think of as the individual we talk to. Who are the players involved here that are impacting our ability to get cyber insurance? And I don't mean that from the criminal perspective, from the provider perspective.
So you have agents or brokers, and that is your advocate or your intermediary between the organization or the business and the insurance company. And then you have a certain sector of insurers who play in the cyberspace. So depending on the data collected by your advocate or intermediary, they're the ones who negotiate terms on your behalf with those specific insurers. There's I would say a gamut of insurers. Some of them are Lloyd's related, some of them are domestic. So depending on what it is that you're looking for or what niche area your corporation or organization fits into, we would strategically pick insurers on your behalf.
This is something that was really instructive to me as we were talking about it, is the importance of having the right advocate on the agent side with the right relationships in order to unlock what right now seems to be a difficult thing to achieve, which is a cybersecurity policy at an affordable price. So, Sean, maybe speak a little bit more about that if you don't mind. What role does the agents play in this?
Well, I would suggest. Well, I'm not suggest. I'll state. As a buyer of insurance, you as whatever XYZ company doing whatever it is you're doing, it's difficult to read a policy and understand what it actually covers, particularly in the cyber realm. Cyber insurers think they're the most creative people in the world, and they create different definitions for the exact same thing. And what we've been seeing lately is because of, I'll give an example. The rise of ransomware has been astronomical. And so there are insurers out there right now that are very subtly writing out the coverage for ransomware exposures. And if you don't have
Amazing.
an agent advocating on your behalf who knows who those insurers are and what that wording looks like, you could be buying a completely useless tool and paying a lot of money for
It's
it.
like fire insurance for your house that won't cover like a flame. If it's caused by a flame, because
it's
remarkable.
I'll make one other comment on that. One of my favorite things I say to people when it comes to buying cyber insurance is the only insurance product that they will sell you. And the metaphor is this: if your house is on fire, they're still selling you the product while your house is on fire.
Wow.
And that's the truth. It is so prolific, the infiltration of phishing, spam, hack. Like you get malware, and rooting that out is a very challenging thing. And again, I'm gonna go back to, if you're not educating your employees, the best of intention causes some massive losses.
This is really good. But we're seeing, and you were alluding to it, the checklist, the requirements coming from insurers to our clients are, a couple of years ago, they were kind of like, do you have passwords? Well, goodness, hope so. Didn't even really ask if they're good passwords. Maybe they started to get, now they're these multi-page questions that frankly, even some of our sophisticated clients can't answer. They really need help with this. Is this going to continue? Is this the definitions of like the requirement on the client to qualify and to prove that they're insurance worthy? Aliya, is this just going to keep ramping up?
I believe so. I believe it's going to keep ramping up, but I think it's going to be very targeted towards certain sectors or industries. So there will be, let's say, healthcare, as an example, is going to have a higher level of requirements versus somebody who might just be a smaller organization with 2 or 3 employees and is in the construction industry, right? So I think it will ramp up, but keeping in mind that your cyber insurance, your organization is not just the sum of um, the qualifiers. It's not the technical issues. Your organization has to be positioned properly in front of that cyber insurer. We have to tell your entire story, your entire company's
Oh,
history.
interesting.
It's not just those requirements in that application, and it goes back to how the broker is able to strategically position you within the marketplace and explain all of that, because even though those technical requirements might be needed and you should have them in place, just to protect your organization minimally, um, maybe you have other things happening. So, for example, training. Maybe you are having your employees train with respect to social engineering every quarter, every half a year. Maybe there is some testing that is happening on the back end that is equivalent to maybe some of those gaps in your application. So you are not just the sum of those technical items. You are also a holistic organization that has to be presented properly to that insurer.
Well, first of all, I have to take this opportunity to do a little shout out to our technical and cybersecurity team. Those of our clients who are on the latest renditions of our services, F12 Infinite and F12 Select, they get cyber training included. And we really insist on it. Sean, you were talking about training as being one of the things that's required. I will say sometimes the struggle we see is leaders in organizations. I'm talking to the CEOs and the CFOs. That training's good for everybody else, but they don't need it. They won't fall for these
They're
bad
the
guys.
worst. They're the worst. Yeah, no. So I couldn't agree with you more. And what Aliya was speaking to in regards to the training, and I think Aliya, you had some other comments to make on that. So I want to make sure you make those. But when it comes to the training, it needs to go top to bottom. It absolutely needs to be, the CEO needs to be the first person who says, I want this training. And I'm talking now from a fiduciary responsibility. If you're not setting the standard,
Yeah.
as leaders go, so goes the organization, is the saying. And I couldn't agree with it more, particularly in regards to the education piece and their cyber exposure, understanding how easy it is. And I'll confess, we do some phishing exercises here, and it's at random intervals. I fell for one. I did. I fell for it. It was
Well,
terrible.
you know who works really well from home is cyber criminals. Like
Oh
they're working
yeah.
from home just fine. And our CTO, he's a little mean. He runs his team, runs our cybersecurity awareness program and the one for our clients. And they've noticed some things that the criminals are doing that, for example, you want to get people to click on an attachment and open it up. Say it's about a lost kitten. A lost kitten was found in the parking lot. Like the human instinct to look at a photo of a cat and feel that that worked better than, oh, there's money or an invoice. Who knew? A few people at our organization were even caught by that clever training. Aliya, it's you have a little more you wanted to add when we're on the topic of training.
Yeah, I just wanted to state that training is the crux and the cornerstone of your cybersecurity. Having a good training program implemented in your organization, which I can take to an insurer and present, will get you so far through the door. It will lower your rates. It will allow that underwriter to feel a certain comfort level that just the technical questions, whether you have, MFA, your RDP closed, all of that stuff won't. So I just want to reiterate the importance of that, because it's the one thing that I have found will get me across that finish line with insurers.
So, I mean, there's number one action item for everybody. Make sure you have a cyber training program, one that you can validate, that can report back who's taken it when, how they've been tested. I think insurers love that. If you're an F12 customer, you may already have it. Make sure you're using it. Make sure if you're the leader of the organization, you're enforcing it. And second thing is, if you don't already have it, please talk to your F12 account representative about adding. It's easy to add. It's a nominal cost, and it can save a world of pain. We call it the human firewall. That's our term for it. It's part of your protections as your individual. We've got a question that came in. I wanted to share them maybe a little bit live. It says, considering the huge rise in premiums and lowering of coverage we are seeing for companies who have insurance and who are doing the right thing, right? They have MFA. We'll talk a little bit more about the basics. They've got things like the MFA and the cybersecurity training and, good passwords and good hygiene, patching and all the rest. Are the insurance companies not making the case for self-insurance? And I guess the argument here is, if you're just making yourself Fort Knox, therefore, does that lessen your need for insurance? Either of you like to take that question up?
After you, Aliya.
I mean, there's various forms of self-insurance. I mean, you could request higher deductibles. You're self-insuring to that deductible amount. I do have some organizations who do that. They have, $25, $50, $100,000 deductibles. They've got high limits, $5 million, $10 million limits. So there is a sense of self-insurance there as well. Sean, you want to jump in with anything else?
Yeah, I would suggest that I hear what you're saying, and I feel the pain. I really do. Couple comments I would make is this. One is, one of the biggest exposures when it comes to your cyber insurance is your business interruption as a result. And so for smaller SMEs, or mid-sized SMEs, we're talking about potentially over, if you're shut down and you have to restore data and you're not able to operate, we're talking, it could be 30 days, it could be 6 months. We have an example of a startup laboratory. They're a small company that has they've been shut down now for almost 18 months. They lost all of their data and they're having to rebuild it and requalify for their funding. And all of their investors are kind of like, well, why weren't you properly insured for this? And they said, well, we just didn't realize the exposure on the business interruption side of things. We thought, it might take us a while to rebuild, but nobody told us. And at the time, they're now our client. At the time, they didn't have anybody advising them on this regard. So when it comes to self-insurance, I would suggest that you need to be very careful. You need to look really carefully at your potential loss of business income as a result of downtime. If it's, on average, if you are affected by a ransomware, we could probably get you back up and running if it's not serious within 14 to 25 days. But it takes that long. It is not a simple process. And your systems are, as far as I can tell from, there's not a company out there that isn't absolutely dependent upon their internal systems to function.
I want to add a bit of a different perspective to that too. I use a car analogy. If you're driving a Volvo and you're the world's safest driver, you got the best tires on it, you still can't protect yourself from other drivers 100%. And the challenge we see in cybersecurity is your organization. And by the way, if you hadn't caught our last webcast, we're talking to the CTO of, or CSO now of WatchGuard Technologies, fascinating conversation about the supply chain risk. You may have your house in order, but all of the different interfaces with your suppliers and your technologies can be your fish tank. It can be like, they can infiltrate your organization and cause a cyber breach. It's the nightmare scenario in IT, right? We use other people's software, and we have to have a regime to increase protection, but there's no absolute. There's just too many points of entry.
I'll make another comment, and that is that for most companies that experience, let's go with ransomware. To deal with a ransomware claim or an incident in your company right now, if you are not insured, ransomware requests are going through the roof. The average in Canada now is about 200,000 for them to release your data. And if you think you can rebuild it yourself and you try and it doesn't work, it's going to cost you even more than that.
We've seen a couple of things, and sometimes we've been brought in to organizations, unfortunately, after an incident. We'd much rather have the conversation before, but we come in and help where we can, no matter what the situation. The criminals apparently study the revenue of the business and calibrate the ransom based upon what they understand about the revenue. The other thing we've seen is where they've been in an organization for 100 days or more, and they make their way to the backups. And if the backups are a system that's not a cloud, not disconnected, they actually make sure they encrypt that first. So they've got you. Like it's insidious. It's not
very sophisticated stuff.
It's very sophisticated. We talked about training is kind of number one. Curious, what do you see number 2 and 3 might be, Aliya, from insurers? Like, okay, you got that in order. What's the next best thing our audience can do to help protect their organization?
MFA encryption, controlling those exit and entry points, probably the most important thing.
Excellent. And MFA, for everyone who doesn't know what multi-factor authentication, it means it's just not a username and password, because those are stolen all the time. You also have to have a token or an app or some other way of approving. Sean, anything you want to add to that list?
No, those are the top three for me. We've already talked about training, which I can't say enough. Training, and then it would be, you want to have your monitor logs, you up to date. You want to make sure your patches are up to date. You want to make sure that all these are the things that the insurers are looking at from a technical side. We want to make sure that again, hygiene. If you're working with F12, you know that you're being well protected, but Devon, you can talk to this. You have many tools that in cascading levels of effectiveness.
Yeah, we sure do, but it does start with those two. And in fact, in our new programs, we offer a cyber. We just want everyone to adopt MFA and adopt cybersecurity training. So we say, hey, if you're doing those and they're being done by all of your staff, if you have a breach, we'll pay your cybersecurity deductible, because those two elements can reduce your risk profile so significantly. So yeah,
I'll make
just
a comment.
just to
Insurers
encourage
don't
it.
like 2FA. Insurers don't like
Oh, fair enough.
2FA very much either.
Yeah.
They
A
don't like
little
2FA.
too
So
easy to hack.
MFA, not 2FA.
Yeah. A couple of different ways to go for it. Very good point. Very good point. I'd like to explore a little bit about policy differences, because what struck me is how, and some people find out after an incident, they may not have the coverage they think they have, that they thought they're covered, and now they go to make a claim and it turns out this, that, or the other thing was an exception. They don't have the coverage. Can you help unpack for us what's going on there with the policies themselves? Either of you like to grab that?
So I'd probably say that cyber insurance is the Wild West of the insurance products out there. No cyber product is the same, nor is it equal. There are minimal cyber products that I call throw-ins. They're 50K, maybe 100K that someone might tack onto a policy. I don't consider that a cyber product or a cyber policy. Someone would probably burn through something like that if they actually had a true cyber incident in 2 or 3 days. When you factor in forensics, business interruption costs, etc. With respect to cyber products, I mean, depending on the limits, there's so many variations between what is insured and not insured, and then there's variations between the technical terms that they're using. So cybercrime versus social engineering, extortion versus ransomware. You might be getting the same thing, but you don't know, because from one policy to the next, it is very, very distinctive and different. Sometimes you're getting third party only. Sometimes you're getting first party with lower limits, so you're not getting full limits. Sometimes, depending on the insurer, you've got an aggregate for everything else underneath, right? You're sharing limits. So not every policy is equal. There are insurers that are better than other insurers out there. And honestly, the premium differences between them is inconsequential most often.
But the coverage is consequential.
Exactly.
Differences.
I'll give a great example, if I could.
Please, Sean.
So if you are a manufacturer and you have equipment that is networked together or has access to the internet, if your equipment is hacked and is set to overheat, let's go with a printing press is turned up, or a boiler is turned up to an explosion level, and there's property damage or bodily injury as a result of a hack of some kind. If you are not with the correct insurer, most insurers write out damage to property and bodily injury on the cyber side. And here's the worst part, your property policy or your liability policy won't pick it up because it was caused by a hack. So you have to be with the correct insurer. And the truth is, if you're a manufacturer, there's only 3 or 4 insurers that will offer
that will touch you. Okay.
Property damage and bodily injury.
And if you're in the sorry.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, this may seem esoteric. This may seem like, well, we got a customer that after a IT incident in their manufacturing process, a kiln overheated, destroyed all the material in it, and several $100,000 worth of like the actual machine. and the root cause was the IT system that would have monitored that. So these things aren't as crazy as they sound. They happen in my own hometown, and cause effects which are just devastating for businesses. Aliya, I think I talked over you. You were going to share something there.
I was just going to say that there are also cyber policies that are very distinctive and unique to an industry. So technology packages, as an example. So if you're a tech company, you might not even be able to get cyber standalone. You'd have to have it rolled into a technology package where you're getting your professional liability and your errors and omissions. So depending on what you're doing, you have to have an individual who is looking through your policy and making sure you're getting the right product, because you might be exposed completely.
It's a great point. I want to back up a little bit because you use some terms there that I think are really important to help everyone understand the difference in policies. One is, and I've seen this bite people before, the difference between a cyber breach coverage and extortion or funds transfer fraud. It's got different names and different policies. People think, well, because something happened through the computer, my cyber breach policy protected me. Turns out it didn't, because it fell in the other category. Help us understand what's going on there, if you don't mind. Sean, you want to grab that, or Aliya? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, she's there.
All right.
So I was just going to say, sometimes I feel like the insurers just want to make themselves look unique by using a different term.
Okay.
It's very frustrating for us when we're looking through these policies. So what you were referencing, well, there's ransomware and extortion, same thing, but two different distinctive terms. And depending on the policy, there's different triggers for each one of those. E-crime versus cybercrime versus social engineering, same thing. But limits are different and triggers are different, because under each one of those, you can have one insurer who has a whole gamut where they also include funds transfer fraud related to the CEO's personal accounts versus nobody else doing that.
Fascinating.
Right? So there's all of these little idiosyncrasies and unique little bits to every single policy, and not one of them is built the same.
Yeah, and the one we've seen is the fund transfer fraud, where they've been somebody's been fooled through an email correspondence quite frequently, and money's gone to a supplier or vendor, somebody that shouldn't have, sometimes for months. But their systems weren't breached, their people were breached. Like it's just a different, but that's an important difference I've come to understand to insurers. Any color to add to this, Sean?
Yeah, the difference between a hack and what you just said, which is a voluntary participation in a manipulation. So when you are voluntarily participating with the best of intentions, that's why it's called social engineering. They're using your desire to be a good employee, a good CFO, a good whatever it might be, and they're leveraging you to respond out of the goodness of your heart in an expedient way, and hopefully not a too thoughtful way, to send money. And so the most common is, hey, here's vendor X. We've changed our banking information. Please, when you transfer the funds, please do so to this new account. So there's been no breach. Nobody's hacked into your system. There's no ransomware involved. This is strictly you have been manipulated. And so the coverage needs to be included in the policy. And there are a number of policies that are writing that out or putting very high deductibles on those types of coverages, because it is just so common. So that's an example.
If everyone doesn't mind me getting a little bit technical from our experience on this, just to illustrate how sophisticated these can be. Somebody can get phished. They think they're updating their PayPal account password or something. They got their password. The individual then get into their Office 365, their Outlook email, and they'll create a rule that you'll never know unless you look for it, that all the email just goes to this other outside box. It's just a forwarding rule that's hidden. So they're watching the communication, watching it for months. And all of a sudden, there's a legitimate request to change some banking information or payroll information, and they just intersect themselves now with the other party in an otherwise legitimate, change the email domain by one letter, and then boom, it's done. We've gone through and proactively on the 365 accounts across all of our clients, turned off the ability to have forwarding on accounts, just so people, it only enabled it when there's a legitimate reason for some reason, because this was exploited, and it was so clever. And you think of how easy it would be if you're in the stream of someone's communication to just misdirected. Reason I'm saying this is because I think people sometimes feel like they're too smart to get affected by this, and I'm here to tell you, you are not too smart to get affected by some of these criminals. They have a lot of time and effort. Anyway, off my soapbox for now. So we talked a little bit about policies. Anything else while we're on this topic about important considerations when people are scrutinizing their policies and their options for coverage?
I would say reputational harm. Having that extension put into your cybercrime policy, going back to Sean's earlier example of business interruption and how that downtime, how long that one client he mentioned had downtime. Because of the reputational harm involved, will they ever be back to the revenue stream that they had? So having that extension of reputational harm cover added to your cyber policy, I think is of utmost importance.
And I have to imagine that's even the reputational harm is even more acute when you're in a trusted sector like finance, like law, like health, like IT, right? It's insurance. Like it's
yeah. And watching those limits too, because sometimes a lot of them are sub-limited to something less than what the full limit is. So you'll see, if you have a $5 million policy, you'll have only $1 million of reputational harm coverage. Social engineering or cybercrime, you might only have 250K. Sometimes you might only have 50K. So watching those limits is of utmost importance.
Interesting. So hopefully everybody is now pulling their policies out and giving them a good scrutiny. Sean, anything you'd like to add on this topic?
No, I strongly agree. For me, I just see the exposure, particularly on clients that are in the mid-market sector, on the BI side. I can't overstate just how impactful that loss of revenue as a result of being down for a period of time
The business interruption. Yeah.
And then the other one I would suggest is really important is make sure your policy has the ability to defend you from regulators like governments. So in the event, let's take a ransomware for example. We had a situation where an accounting firm had the policy in place. They did not notify us at the moment of recognition of this issue that the ransomware had taken a hold. To prove their serious nature, the ransom hackers, whatever you want to call them, had released a small portion of private data into the dark web to prove that they had the information. And it was a leverage point for them.
It's like sending the ear of your hostage. Like we mean business and we've got you. Yeah.
But here's the effect that the accounting firm didn't realize was that by doing that, they're now responsible in the jurisdiction where they live to report it to the privacy commissioner. And without the consultancies that were built into the policy for regulators and investigation and forensic audit, those people, that accounting firm would have been up the creek because they wouldn't have notified the privacy commissioner. The public information, they had a requirement to do so. Had it been made public in such a way that it affected individuals, the privacy commissioner would have contacted them. They would have had regulatory fines. They would have had all kinds of issues.
And that's probably underappreciated, I think, in Canada, is the obligation we have to notify both the privacy officer, and my understanding is, I forget the wording, but if there's a reasonable belief that there could be harm, the individuals, there's some language like that.
The definition is potential for significant harm.
There you go. Okay, so potential, the word potential is pretty wide, right? So
nebulous.
That can be expensive, depending upon the exposure you have to the private information.
In the situation, they had the consultancies built into the policy that advised them how to report it, and they did so, and there was no further action by the commissioner. But had they not, they could have been hanging out in the wind.
Yeah. Wow. So many layers to this, because we often think about an attack happening, and then what we need the insurance for is maybe our business gets interrupted and we got to restore our data, and that's it. But the ramifications from notifications, from reputational harm, these other aspects are so important. Aliya, it feels like we're on the topic of like lessons from the trenches. Any war stories that come to your mind that you might want to tell that are instructive?
Well, I have to be a little careful about this.
Of course.
But just tying into Sean's comment about privacy breach and notification to clients whose data has been breached. one of my clients that this happened to, they were in healthcare. The costs associated with monitoring and breach notification were between $3,000 and $5,000 a year per client. So times that by 100 clients, times that by 1,000
This is an
clients.
ongoing cost due to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
nature of the
Yes.
infiltration.
Yes.
Oh my.
So you can imagine the cost related just simply to privacy breach and notification and monitoring.
So I've learned something, because you think of notification as firing out an email to everybody, sorry, we lost
No.
you. It's a lot more obligation than this. Okay.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, I got the chills. You bring up an interesting point. So on the tech side of cybersecurity, we look at it through 5 different, there's a model, NIST model. We talk a lot about protecting, right? Fortifying the system so that it can't be breached. And we talk a lot about identifying vulnerabilities, maybe through pen testing and things and patching them. And we talk about recovery on the other end, getting you back, your IT systems back up and running if the worst should happen. But the middle part, detecting a breach and then actually actioning it and responding to it and shutting down the infiltration before it does damage, is a really emerging thing. Is the service in our industry we're calling is MDR. You shouldn't get MDR if you haven't got security awareness training and multi-factor. Do the hygiene things first, but to the audience is something to explore, because of the fact that they can get into your systems, and it's hard to know they're there if you don't have these other more sophisticated technologies and services. It's not just a technology; it's eyeballs on screens helping to protect you. So this is such a changing landscape. Okay, off of that now, and returning to our conversation about cyber insurance. If I'm coming up for it, and I've got my checklist, and I'm exploring cyber insurance options, and I'm a little confused about what to do, or what we have is actually, I know some organizations right now who are really struggling to even get to a yes from it. It's not about how much it costs for them right now. They can't get to a yes it seemingly from a cyber insurance coverage. What should they do? How would you recommend they tackle this challenge?
I'd say firstly, make sure you have the right advocate that is going in with the correct submission, holistically telling your organization's story along with that checklist that you're taking in with them, and make sure that the advocate you have or the agent or broker actually understands cyber. Because I think that's a big gap. There's a lot of noise out there with respect to different cyber policies, but I don't think there's a lot of specialization.
And this whole conversation has illustrated to me the importance of specialization. It's a complicated, and it may be intentionally so, but very complicated policy. Sean.
I would say that it starts with the directors and officers of the organization. The directors and officers have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the company has acquired the infrastructure and the tools of resilience to ensure the continued growth and prosperity of that organization. And from my experience, I've actually seen in the States, it hasn't happened in Canada yet, but if it's happened in the States, it's making its way here eventually. I've seen boards sued by investors because they didn't buy cyber insurance.
Wow.
Yeah, so these are the kind of considerations that boards and C-suites need to be right involved in. It should not be distributed, sent out to, well, we got an IT guy. I sit down with IT people all the time, and they are my biggest advocates for selling cyber insurance because they know how vulnerable systems are because of people like me who click on things that I'm not supposed to click on. So I would suggest that if you're having a hard time getting across the line, there are a lot of tools out there. Just go onto Google. What is required of directors
Yeah.
and officers in regards to cyber? Just put that in, and it's going to be amazing what comes up in Canadian law and in just internationally as well.
And this is why we're seeing, particularly in technology critical businesses, whether they're an app dev or technology is vital to their success, maybe as a lot of organizations, we're seeing the chief security officer role more and more. A lot of our clients aren't at the size to warrant that, but they may need the services of a CSO. Again, talk to your F12 account manager about making sure you have a strategy that protects you and the board and your reputation. Cyber insurance being part of it. I know our security head Calvin Engen is popular saying like we often get in the conversation about technology, but then he's got to pivot it. It's about controls and policies and insurance. Like this is not a technology only discussion. There's no magic bullet like, oh, we install this software. And although sometimes the software providers will pretend that if you install their software, you're protected, it's not quite that easy.
It is
Yeah,
technology first, however. It
I
is
agree.
technology first.
Yeah.
It's technology first. Systems, plans, creating a PCP, a business continuity plan around your infrastructure. And when you work your way through that and you do the SWOT on it, you're going to come to the conclusion that you need to have something that backstops your technology and your systems. And it's going to be, it is insurance. That is the tool. We're seeing that from banks, actually, more and more. Banks are starting to require cyber insurance. On the policies of if you get a mortgage, we're seeing banks saying, okay, you got a mortgage, you need to have cyber insurance.
I had not heard that. What I have
Yeah.
seen is on the sales side, to qualify for opportunities, some organizations are having to demonstrate, in addition to their WCB compliance and everything else, that they have cyber coverage, so that the individual doing the RFP or whatever knows that they're covered, that their supply chain is protected from what are high likelihood events. Yeah. Aliya, what are you seeing the most? Anything that's current or any predictions you have for 2023 as organizations start thinking about, as their policies? Let me frame it this way. We've been talking a lot about lessons that folks whose policies have come up for renewal in the last little while have been experiencing. What about people whose policies are coming up in January and February? What should they be thinking about? What can they ready themselves? What steps can they take right now to ready themselves for to be in the best position come the spring?
Assess and evaluate your cybersecurity measures in place. Be prepared for increases again this year. That is what I'm seeing coming down the pipeline. Also, reductions in certain sublimits. That's still continuing to happen. There's another point Sean is going to speak to, which is reinsurance. But I see some stabilization happening, but there are still pockets of uncertainty within the cyberspace, and specifically two specific industries that have a lot of data, a lot of private information, healthcare, banking, those kinds of sectors.
That makes sense. Sean, I think Aliya laid you up for a reinsurance conversation. Help me understand what that is.
Did. Thank you, Aliya. So reinsurance is the money that exists behind the insurance company that backstops the insurance company's requirements for funding. Every government in the world requires insurers to be capitalized to a certain level. So they have a certain amount of capital themselves, and then reinsurance tops it up to the requirements. So what we're finding is that the cyber events of the last number of years are now affecting the reinsurance markets, not just for cyber renewals coming up this year. It's actually dovetailing and working its way over into other types of policies: property, general liability, professional liability. The reinsurance companies are saying, well, we've been so badly hit on the cyber side that we now need to raise the prices on all of the policies.
So they're losing so much money, as it were, on their policies that they're having to raise rates across. That's fascinating. I never would have tied that together. The cyber problem being why my hail damage insurance is. I live in Calgary, so hail damage is, how it is.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a reason for that too, but let's one topic at a time. Fascinating.
Yeah. So what we're finding is that the insurance companies are saying, okay, so we need to write the business that based upon premium that pays for losses. Well, on the cyber side, the premium has covered maybe 65% of the losses in the last number of years. So that's why you've been seeing these increases. And everybody goes, insurance companies make money hand over fist. Well, I can show you the data that shows insurance companies have been losing money for the last 4 years. And they're just now getting to the place where the premiums are getting to the right spot where they're covering losses just in the last year.
Which explains why they're scrutinizing the risk more appropriately with organizations, because a lot of them don't have hygiene in order. And I will say in technology as well, there are deceptive practices for my industry as well, where some things we've seen, like people say, do I have penetration testing? And they're buying some really inexpensive automated pen testing product, which is no better than a free scan you could do on your website. Like, it's just, that's not what the insurer is asking, but the buyers aren't sophisticated enough when they're answering the questions to understand that what they have isn't what they ask, because the whole thing's a little bit murky and folks are positioning it. Hey, we're nearing the end of our discussion. I just want to remind anyone who might have any further questions to address things we haven't answered. Aliya, anything you want to add, or any ending salvo you want to put into to the discussion that folks should take with them as they exit this webcast?
Everyone is insurable. There is a way to get everybody past that finish line.
That's hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, I have never not placed a cyber policy.
Okay.
And
Whoa. I
yeah,
want to circle this, because I've heard from organizations personally that they're denied, and you're saying there's a path to insurability for everyone.
there always is. Sometimes it's unique and individual to that organization, but there's always a path to insurability. It comes down to what your advocate knows, how they're able to position you in the market space. Yes, they're going to need all of those technical applications, but they're also going to need to collect all the additional information. Sean mentioned, the board of directors, information regarding their practices. What is the culture like in the organization? Items like that, and going forward and making that submission into the marketplace very strategically with specific insurers that are going to be very interested in that risk. Everybody is insurable.
That's a very hopeful way to end. And may I just, on your behalf, to suggest to the audience that if you're having troubles, Aliya and her organization would love to help out, because they have those connections. Sean, how would you like to wrap up? What do you want to make sure our audience walks away with?
I was just so inspired by what Aliya said.
She kind of took the bacon,
Yeah,
hey?
she did. I was
Yeah.
like, what else do you need to say? So I guess my closing thought would be, there are lots of tools out there to evaluate your cyber hygiene. I can't stress enough that hygiene is critical to begin the conversation. Aliya said we can get you insurance, but that may require you to take a long, hard look at your hygiene. So the government of Canada has some great tools on hygiene that are out there. Partners like F12 have fabulous tools that can help you get there. You can get there, and you can improve your bottom line and protect your investment by improving your hygiene. And then finding an advocate. Finding an advocate is strong in the sector. If you're in a construction business, you want to work with somebody who specializes in construction to get you the right coverage, because they know that industry. So if you have a generalist broker that is trying to get you cyber, they're probably struggling, and they're doing the best they can. I would never throw a broker under the bus. They're trying the best they can to get you the coverage you need. They may not know how to navigate this weird cyber world. So I would suggest finding a cyber advocate as a broker that understands this exposure, that can advocate for you, that can give you the good and the bad news in regards to what needs to be done to get you there, and then hold on for the ride.
It doesn't appear to be getting any better anytime soon in terms of
Not
the
yet.
threat landscape. Thank you both very much. This was a very informative and entertaining discussion. I know I left with a lot of nuggets. I'm going to close with my own salvo, and that is, if you're an F12 customer and you're tired of your account manager talking to you about multi-factor authentication and managed cybersecurity awareness training and managed detection and response, one way to make them shut up is to get on board. And I can't urge you enough. It's vital. It is, and it's, without those things, it's not a question of if you're going to get breached, it's when. And I don't say that to be a fear monger. It's from lived experience, is a term they like to use now. And we would much rather never have to help another organization recover from a cyber incident. Isn't fun. Nobody likes it. It's just hard work. Thank you all very much. And if I don't have an opportunity to do I don't think we have another webcast this year. So let me say Merry Christmas, Happy, etc. to everyone who's joined us. Thank you.
Thank you.